Picture this. You're scrolling through your social media feed and you come across a post with a catchy title like The Truth Revealed or Unfiltered Opinions. Intrigued, you click on it only to discover yet another podcast promising to uncover the real story behind some trending topic or some controversial issue. But is this what podcasts have become? A free-for-all platform for anyone with a microphone and an opinion? Well, I don't think so. Don't get me wrong, though. Podcasts can be incredibly informative and entertaining. But somewhere along the line, the concept of speaking your truth, like we always say, has taken over, and the quality of content seems to have taken a nosedive. Now, people seem more interested in shocking their listeners than actually providing valuable insight or reliable information. So dare I say that podcasts have become blogs. It's like we've created a monster and now it's wreaking havoc on the airwaves. The problem is, though, this trend isn't just harmless entertainment like many people would think. The constant barrage of sensitization or sensationalized opinions and questionable fact has a real impact on people's behavior and people's perceptions. Take the younger generation, for example. They're growing up in a world where anyone with a Wi-Fi connection can call themselves an expert in a particular field or on a particular topic, and it's becoming increasingly difficult for them to discern and filter the credible sources from the noise. Now, on the other hand, the older generation is left scratching their heads and wondering when the world got so crazy. And they see these podcast hosts spitting out half-baked theories and trash-talking anyone who disagrees with them, and they're left questioning again whether anyone even knows what the truth is anymore. They always say there are three sides to the story: your side, my side, and the truth. Well, this is Fofana Africa, and today we're talking about podcasts, the advantages, the disadvantages, and where we are with podcasts in this present generation. My name is Blessings Mosugu, and for the next 1 hour, I'll be taking you through insightful conversations with my guests. So stay with me. All right, thanks for staying with us. It's still Fofana Africa. Well, I know that I made it seem like it is, but it's not all doom and gloom. There's a silver lining here, and that is the opportunity to elevate the conversation of podcasts, what podcasts should actually be. And there are people who actually do this thing right. Now, we can choose to support podcasts that prioritize accuracy, integrity, respect for diverse viewpoints, fact-checking claims, and debunking rumors. We can encourage our friends and family to be discerning listeners, seeking out reliable sources of information. And who knows, maybe we can even start a new trend, speaking our truth responsibly. So see podcasts as AI. You know, the fact that there are so many people who are altering it doesn't mean that it doesn't have its own advantages. So let's take a deep breath, hit pause on the podcast pandemonium, and remember that we have the power to shape the conversations. After all, it's much more fun to listen to podcasts that leave us feeling informed and inspired rather than wondering if we've just stepped into an alternate universe. But it's not about to be a monologue, and so I have amazing guests who will be joining me to discuss this phenomenon today. Joining me now, we have Fola Folayan, who is the founder of the Radio Masterclass, who's joining us from Kigali, Rwanda. Thank you so much, Fola Folayan, for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
An absolute pleasure. Also, I have with me in the studio right now another delectable guest, David Adeleke, who is a writer, journalist, and a media entrepreneur. Thank you so much, David, for joining us as well.
Thank you for having me.
An absolute pleasure. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will have more guests, as time goes by. Hopefully we can have them before the end of the show. But in the meantime, I want us to dive deep into the conversation. So I'll start from Fola. Now, a lot of times the major mantra for podcasts is people saying, oh, I'm just speaking my truth, right? And it has become like an anthem for everyone, especially the younger generation. So how do you define speaking your truth in the context of podcasts, and how detrimental is that? I said earlier that they say there are three sides to a story: your side, my side, and the truth. And everyone claims that they speak the truth. So What exactly is the truth?
Well, I feel like, this is an interesting question. When you say what exactly is the truth, I would be forced to ask in what context, but I think I understand where you're going. So when it comes to podcast, I have to make this very clear that I personally see it as a very beautiful medium, a medium that has democratized, storytelling, that has given everyone an opportunity to have a voice. And for us listeners, it has also given us the opportunity to hear diverse perspectives and, diverse opinions. Now, it is true, the problems that you have outlined that we seem to have rather let me say potpourri of all sorts of content, when it comes to podcasting. And then sometimes some opinions leave you gobsmacked and you're like, what in the world am I listening to? But that's the beauty of this democratized storytelling, because everyone gets to have a say, no matter how unhinged your opinion sounds or your takes are. There will always be an audience for you. Coming from a radio background, while I was working in Nigeria, it was a very restrictive field. If you don't have a radio license, you're definitely not broadcasting to anyone. And then with the rise of the internet and social media, it became a liberating platform where people who couldn't express certain thoughts or certain opinion or certain feelings on the radio because of the regulations, and would now have a platform on the internet to express their thoughts and say all those things that they couldn't say. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the things they wanted to say are bad or harmful to society. It was just that there were certain rules, there were certain regulations, there were certain restrictions that they couldn't, certain hurdles they couldn't jump through, and so podcasts created that platform. However, I do agree that it's become a double-edged sword right now, in as much as it's open and accessible to everyone. The downside is there is no formal gatekeeping on misinformation, on gossip, on low-quality conversations. But then again, who judges what is low quality and what is high quality? What is low quality? What is high quality conversation for me and you might not be for some other person, and what you might judge as low quality might not be the same for some other person. So I'm of the opinion that the truth can be relative. It depends on what it is you're talking about. But I do draw a line at disinformation or misinformation. I do draw a line. I do draw a line at harmful conversation, at hate speech, things like that. I definitely draw a line. And no matter how big of a platform you have or how free the platform is, I do think that there should be an element of responsibility, if you're going to turn on the mic and say something.
Right, thank you so much for that. Okay, so I think we have another guest joining us, but before I introduce and ask them another question, I want to ask David, what do you think of the podcast of today? I mean, it wasn't always this bad. There was a time where it was educative, informative, enlightening, but now it's just, young people, old people coming out to say things that sometimes are not even true. Sometimes their opinions are skewed, and a lot of things are just wrong with podcasts. So what is your take on podcast of today?
I think the reason why we have the kind of responses that we have to the current podcast ecosystem is because now, more than ever, we have access to information on a scale that we've never had access to before. But if you look back in time, if you go back in history, you'll find that a lot of the reactions that we have today are not new. Especially if you read the history of media. Even before journalism, for instance, became a formalized institution, there was always the idea that some people will spread information through writing, for instance, or through some form of communication that the authorities don't agree with. For instance, that's what got Galileo killed, right? So historically, we've always had that divide. Anytime there is a predominant form of mass communication, there is almost always an attendant risk of misinformation. So that's not new. However, the problem is that we've never really had it on this scale before. We've never had to deal with this kind of level before. So that would be my response to the question. Anyone who has issues with what podcasts are doing or whatever perceived harm comes with that, just look back in time. I mean, historically speaking, people have gotten killed for spreading some type of information. So, yeah.
Yes, it is what it is. All right. Joining us also, we have the co-founder of the Shaft podcast, Erasmus Segbefia, joining us from Liverpool, United Kingdom. Thank you so much, Erasmus, for joining us as well.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
A pleasure to have you join us. Now, I also want to ask you what your thoughts are on the podcast of today. I mean, we have spoken extensively on it. Fola and David have spoken about it, but I want to hear your thoughts about it.
Yeah, thank you very much. So as a podcast founder myself, you would assume that I'm very biased towards the existence of podcasts. I think I take note of all of the observations that the other panelists have made about podcasts, the spread of information, misinformation in itself. But I just want to start from this point. I think the question here is that, is more information good or bad? And when you begin to analyze this question, I think there are two sides that you can begin to look at. That first of all, what's the purpose of information? And if information is to educate us and to be able to change our lives and move us in a certain direction, is the existence of podcasts as at this moment doing that or not? And if we are saying that it is not, then what indeed is the problem? I think it's got to do with, because we need to recognize that people in themselves exist, their attention span exists in a zero-sum game, right? So we cannot overwhelm them with information and expect them to be able to take action. So obviously there is something that needs to be done. However, I have a different view that this needs to be, this is a necessary part of the evolution that will get us to the space where we'll be able to utilize information properly.
All right, thank you so much, Erasmus. Okay, before we continue, we have some tweets relating to the topic that we're talking about. So I want us to take the tweets and then from there we'll draw up questions. So this person says, one thing we simply do not talk about enough in the podcast era is that there is a minority of people on this planet who actually have something interesting to say. Another person says, officially we have a podcast pandemic in Nigeria. You think radio presenters are manipulative? It go shock you say we are mere gym instructors compared to podcast hosts. These podcast guys will use artist revelry to farm engagement and still claim plausible deniability. This other person says, this hashtag podcast pandemic needs to end. Looks like most of these podcasters are podcasting just for the sake of podcasting and look clueless about what they're doing, even during the podcast. I'm baffled to see such distinguished names appearing on such below par podcasts. Another one says, if the government doesn't take a drastic measure against the podcast pandemic in Nigeria, by this time next year, every person you come across on the road will likely be wearing a mic. And finally, hot takes here and there. These podcasters know intelligent ladies that will speak on good topics, but will make it headlines. Sex sells, being controversial sells. You complain that these girls don't have sense, but will never watch an educative podcast session. Just a plea. So, interestingly, I'd like to start from the last part, right? And let me, who do I ask? Okay, let me come to Erasmus as a podcaster yourself. That last point, I don't think that we're ready for that conversation because honestly speaking, in a world where only controversy sells, you would see health podcasts, you will not watch that one. You will see motivational, educational podcasts. It's not that one you want, but the ones that talk about sex and how, ladies are destroying their lives, how ladies are, in fact, the ones that bring some of these ladies to talk about some of the things that should not even be spoken of in public. Those are the ones that you watch, and then you come out and say, oh, these podcasts should not even exist in the first place. Well, you're seeing comments and thousands of likes. What is the correlation? Do we really want this thing to end, or are we just putting up a facade?
Yeah, so if you think about it, podcast is the new junk food of the mind. So, and if you think about junk food, most people are going to have a preference for it compared to healthy food because it's actually quite difficult to make the commitment to do so. And then junk food just has a way of finding you Because the problem with the kind of content that they are referring to or they speak about is that it finds you, and if the algorithm is promoting it, and if it's all over, and if your friends are talking about it, you most likely would be indulging in it. It means that if for you to get the best out of it, you need to be very, very intentional. So it is not the fact that the educational content does not exist, but it is that it is not getting in front of people. So I think that's what we need to do. And that's why I'm very happy for conversations like this, because it is this awareness that will let people know that something like The Shaft exists, because we are quietly building an audience and a podcast that is an antidote to low effort reactionary content. And we think that this is most likely going to be far lasting than some of the more viral content, which by tomorrow is no longer news and is no longer relevant to you.
Great. Okay. So, Fola and David, you know a lot about, the media, the policies that govern the media and some of the sanctions. And you know that the mainstream media is a very cautious and careful space wherein you cannot just put out any news, unlike these days where we see blogs just putting out whatever it is. You know that there are certain sanctions that come with some of the things that you say. Just like David said when we started, some of the things you say can incite violence. And there was a story of a lady who mistakenly read a word wrongly, and it started a war between two countries. That's how powerful words are. That's how powerful the information we share are. So that will bring me to the aspect of regulation. Is it that we are not prioritizing this enough to now start putting regulations in place to ensure that when you put out information that is fake or questionable or a misinformation to the audience, you have to pay for it? There's a certain sanction that will be meted out to you. These regulations, is it not time to start having that conversation? And how can we go about regulating some of this information that is put out, at least to caution the effect of just coming out and saying anything in public? Fola? I think you're muted.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much. That was a great question. So here's my take. I would not be the one to quickly call for regulation, because I think that the media as it stands, especially in Nigeria, it's already overregulated. And there are already people, or let me say mischievous people, who would use some of the existing regulations to further, censor the media. So I would not be the one to call for more censorship. Also, we do have laws. We have libel laws. We have defamation laws. We have laws against hate speech. So I don't think that, we should be speaking about regulating podcasts, because the whole point is to democratize access to information, to provide more platforms for people to have their voices heard, and for minority people to be able to have a place to be heard and to be seen. And that's, podcasts have done brilliantly on that. Like the other speaker said, it is what you consume that the algorithm would feed back to you. There are tons of podcasts that cover several subjects. And I have to also say that podcasts don't necessarily have to educate you or inform you or, do all those lofty things that they told us in journalism school that the media.
Fola, are you there?
Okay. Yes, I'm here.
Okay, please go ahead. Yes, there was a little glitch. Please go ahead.
Okay, where did I stop?
Yeah, so you were making a very valid point. It doesn't necessarily have to educate or inform you like people would think.
Yes, exactly. There are several podcasts for that cover several subjects. I personally I'm an avid podcast listener, and every night I listen to true crime podcasts. It's just a documentary about people who have committed, all sorts of crazy crimes. And oddly, I find it quite entertaining. And so there are several podcasts, the ones that teach you how to cook, the ones that just say, things that make you laugh and make you see the world in a different perspective. All of those kind of podcasts have their space. And if it's gossip that you're interested in, if it's entertainment, if it's just life and society and crazy relationship matters, there are people who like that, who consume that, and it's okay. So I want us to be able to have space for all sorts of content, in as much as we were calling for I think what people are afraid of is opinions they don't like, and they're also afraid of, maybe misinformation and disinformation, which it's, like David said, that's always going to be the risk on any media platform. You're always going to have that risk of misinformation. But there are laws that already exist. There are defamation laws. There are, libel laws. So if you feel like, this particular podcast has misinformed about a particular subject and it affects you, you can file a suit and take it up. But to call for, another blanket regulation on podcasts, I would not do that.
Right. Okay, thank you so much for that. I think that will bring me to my next question, David. The question about how to balance it up. Now, like Fola has rightly said, not every content is meant to educate or inform you. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, in the bid to entertain ourselves, sometimes some of the things that, especially because we're trying to put into consideration the younger generation. These days you see a lot of Gen Zs, or even those younger, I'm talking the Gen Alphas, saying some things that you know quite well that it sounds all too familiar. You know that it's one girl who went on a podcast and said something like, if I want to date a man, he has to have at least 1 millionaire in my account first. And everybody's running with that. I won't say everybody, but like, you get what I mean. Like the young girls are like, okay, yeah, I mean, tell them, sis, tell them, that's on period and things like that. So it's like we are trying to awaken something that is very dangerous, a reality that is dangerous in the society, where somebody comes to express their opinion, entertainment or not. It triggers another person's belief in that same opinion, and the person is like, okay, if this is what it is, then I don't think I want to marry for love. I'd rather just marry for money, because there are people out there, the people that are doing it do not have two heads. So basically, I'm just using that as an example, but we see a lot of, because the mind is easily influenced, it's just on different levels, right? So what you take in, eventually you become. So how do we create that balance, David?
That's a very loaded question. So this is what I would say, right? The podcasts that are predominant today are a reflection of the level of education, of interest, and the quality of conversations that we gravitate towards as a society. The podcasts are a symptom of the problem. They are not necessarily the problem. And so to solve this problem, first of all, we need to fix the level of education or the quality of education that we have. When we fix the level of education or the quality of education that we have, then we can fix the problem of interest, because people are only interested in the things that feed them. Now, the quality of food that they crave or the quality of food that they desire is totally up to their level of exposure. If someone knows that it is better for them to crave better things, they will crave better things. If they don't know, then there is no way they're going to crave better things. So the podcasts themselves are a reflection of the quality of education and the quality of interest that we have as a society. And I take myself as an example, or the work that I do as an example. I run a media company that provides data and insights for the creative economy. I know for a fact that what I'm doing is never going to be mass market, it's never going to be hugely popular with a lot of people. But I still do it all the same. And in the process of doing the work, I am educating as many people as I can, reaching out to as many people as I can, where they are. For instance, our newsletter is largely long-form text, but then we repurpose it into bite-sized social media content. And so what we are doing is, in some ways, we are trying to meet our audience where they are and to sort of raise the level of interest or to raise the level of their knowledge. If we do that long enough and well enough, then it will be easier for us to feed people with high quality content. But if we are not willing to do that work, then we are always going to be complaining that, hey, we are putting out this this goes out to a lot of people. We are putting out high quality content and people are not consuming it. Well, people are not consuming it because they are not interested. But the way to solve that problem is to engineer interest and as much as possible engineer desire, engineer education. So if as a collective, and this is not the work of one person, if as a collective we are willing to put in the work that it takes to educate people, I know that there is the element of formal education and all of that, but that's not necessarily a problem that we as individuals can solve. The one that we can solve is to show people that it is possible to be better and to desire better, and then to give them what we consider better content. But ultimately, the podcasts that people love and the podcasts that rank highly are a symptom or they're a symptom of what the society deserves or desires. One last example, if you look at the data, for instance, so last year or 2 years ago, Christian podcasts on Spotify grew at, I think, about 400 and something %, which tells you that more people, which tells you that as a society, we are gravitating more towards Christian content. Now, that also is a symptom, maybe it is a symptom of something, or it is evidence of something. But we can't now say that if people are desiring something, that we must feed them with another thing. People are desiring something because that is what they are gravitating towards. That's what they desire. Maybe, for instance, a lot more people are having awakening of faith, or maybe people think that they need more religion in their lives to get through the very tough time. The point is, the things that people listen to, right, those are reflections of the things that they desire.
Okay, very valid points. Thank you so much, David. Okay, before we continue, I'd like for us to take a quick breather, and then when we come back, we'll continue the conversation on podcast. And I want us to take a more critical look at the advantages and what we can make of it. This is Fola Folayan Africa. Stay with us. Hey, thanks for staying with us. It's still Fola Folayan Africa, and we're talking about a very important topic, which is podcasts, the podcast era. Is it more detrimental than it is advantageous? That's what we're trying to find out. Or how do we create a balance between them? And I still have my amazing guests with me discussing this. So I'm just going to quickly go straight into it. Now, let me come to you, Erasmus. David did mention something. He used a word which I really liked, which is engineering interest. We're in a world where attention span has really, really shortened. And that's why you see people hardly being able to read, hardly being able to. In fact, if they could have someone summarize a movie or an entire series in 10 seconds, they wouldn't mind. And because of that, the first few seconds or few minutes of whatever one hears, we tend to usually just run with it. So in terms of engineering interest and in a bid to look at the advantages of podcasts, how do we engineer? I agree that not all podcasts are attempting to be educative, but at the same time, how do we engineer or rework, our moral compass into the conversations, the ethical conversations? How do we make sure that we are still representing a society where we haven't thrown caution to the wind?
Two observations to make at the top. I think the dangers that we outlined, the very first thing is that we have disguised fun conversations and then we've put them into a very, very serious context. So some of these things that people do say, we do know that they are saying it to go viral. We do know that they are attention farming. However, we can't resist from engaging with it, from being outraged with it. And I think it all contributes to the virality, which in the end incentivizes them to continue that kind of behavior. So if we are to change anything, we need to be able to influence the incentives which exist in here. We need to make sure that people who are promoting far more educational content are put at the helm or are always being put forward in front of the people. I think that's one of the ways of doing this, because if we allow for people to just choose their diets, people run on autopilot and most likely will choose what is most proximate to them, the conversations they can understand, things which they already know, which they like to hear over and over again. It's very, very hard to shift towards information which causes you to pause, which confuses you a bit, but asks you to relax in order for you to take it all in. I think the second point I also want to make is that we should not mistake the fact that there is some educational content to mean that there would be education. I don't think it's as automatic as that. The key question for anyone who begins to consume educational content is that when you take this out of your life, when you take the podcast and everything that you've listened so far out of your life, is there a significant impact? Which begs the question that the process of learning is not just about hearing. Because what we now see is that there is still high value content, but there's so much of it that people tend to get overwhelmed. So people do not feel the need to go in depth into those topics. I think in solving that question, we need to teach people how to consume, how to learn, which means that you need to hear it, you need to reflect on it, you need to take action, and it is repetitive action, which would mean that it becomes a habit. So I think it's these two things. Externally, we need to be able to make sure that we are putting the content that's necessary and useful in the faces of people and always pointing them to it. We need to demotivate the people who are doing some of these viral contents. And thirdly, we need to show people how to consume content.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Now, Fola, what do you think the future of podcasts, and I'm not just talking about Nigeria now, but globally, what do you think the future is, looking at the fact that we are in a fast-paced world, and it's not just podcasts, even technology, social media, people are now coming out to say things that the world didn't really need to know in the first place. So what do you think the future of podcast is if we continue would I say, I don't know the word to use, but on this path, basically?
Podcasts, like every other media platform, will grow and will continue to evolve, just as we have seen television evolve, we have seen radio evolve. In fact, I would argue that podcasting came from radio because it's audio on demand and it's digital audio, and it came, from people listening to radio content and wanting it at, on demand. And so, in terms of what the future of podcasting is, we've seen it grow from audio only to video, and now people prefer more video content. We've seen it become shorter and shorter. Before, people could listen to an hour of uninterrupted audio, but now it's becoming shorter. We've seen people repurpose podcast content into bite-sized social media content. So it will continue to evolve, it will continue to grow, and it will continue to be, I think that for Nigerian or for African creatives, we're going to see a lot more people get into it. So people who are saying that we have a podcast pandemic, I'm sorry to announce that we're not even there yet. We're going to see more investments into podcasting, especially as more and more people do not trust mainstream media or traditional media. As that trust decreases, we're going to see a lot more people, look into news commentary podcasts for their information. We're also going to see a lot more traditional media and African media, traditional media in Nigeria especially, branch out into podcasting because they haven't started doing that yet. We're still seeing a lot of, regular people, everyday people setting up mics. We're not seeing major platforms, major media organizations get into podcasting like, it is done outside or in the West. So that for me is what I think the future will be. But for us consumers, I think the future would be more investment into media literacy and learning to consume podcasts mindfully. There would be more consciousness. Now that we're having this conversation, there will be more and more people conscious of who they're listening to, who is the speaker, what is the speaker's background, what is the purpose of this podcast, what am I hearing, am I being misinformed here, am I being manipulated here? More and more people are going to get more conscious of that, and as a result, to start to change the landscape, of podcasting generally. More creators are going to be more conscious about the quality of content that they're putting out. And as investment comes in, as people see that, okay, this is a way to not just reach broader audiences, but to increase revenue, there will be more structure, there will be more control, and there will be more quality in the content that podcasters are putting out.
All right, thank you so much for that. Okay, let me come back to David. Now that we've established that podcasts are here to stay, just like a lot of technological advancement over time, what are some measures that we should be more conscious of? I know that Fola has mentioned some of it from the aspect of the individuals listening in, but on the part of the government, the society, what are things that we now need to be more conscious of to make sure that this doesn't go out of hand? I know, right? It's a deep question.
It's a deep question. So I don't know that much is going to change. And I agree with Fola's point. We haven't gotten to, we're just beginning, right? This is just the beginning of what is possible. Think about podcasting institute, or as an idea, a concept, has been around for, I think, almost 20 years now, since, with Apple inventing the iPod, which was the foundation of what podcasting now is. It's going to continue evolving, for sure. But I don't know that we can necessarily change anything, because people are always going to want what people want. However, if you are a creator, so now this is me speaking to creators, I think you have a responsibility to produce more high quality work, because I don't think it is fair to treat people like idiots. I don't think it is fair to constantly feed people's base instincts, because that's what a lot of these podcasters are doing. They are taking advantage of the fundamental or the innate human desire to gravitate towards some things. For instance, human beings by nature like controversy. We like things that excite us and pump up our hormones, pump up the adrenaline in us. But if you are a creator, at the very least, you should be conscious about the kind of thing that you're putting out. And no one is saying that you should always make your stuff deep. There is always going to be room for the very deep things, and there's going to be room for the very, very fun things, and that's okay. But you have a responsibility to not feed the base instincts of your audience, because if we really think about it, ultimately, this responsibility lies with the people who are creating the content, because people are going to respond to what you give them. It's a fundamental. If you go to, you go to journalism or media school, they will tell you the audience will respond to the level of material that is out there. If people don't know that there can be better, like I said earlier, then they won't seek better. But if they know that it is possible to look for better things and to get better things, then they are going to actively seek out those better things. It's just like someone who is working in a 9-to-5. They are paying you 100,000. Maybe you are satisfied with the 100,000 because you don't know that it is possible to earn 200,000. The moment you realize that it is possible to earn 200,000, maybe you spoke to your friend who works the same job in the same industry, in maybe a company just down the street from you, and then you realize this person is earning double what I'm earning. Then you suddenly realize it is possible to aim for more. But if you never knew that it was possible to aim for more or to even get more in the first place, then there's really nothing you can't really aspire to that. So ultimately, the responsibility is with the creator. It's okay to create fun stuff, but I think that fundamentally, and I consider myself a creator in some way, fundamentally, you're responsible for what the audience gravitates towards. So in many ways, you're a tastemaker. Help people aspire for better tastes. That's all I'll say.
Right. Thank you so much for that. Still staying on the responsibility of the creators now, Erasmus, I want to ask you, because that's what you do. Now, we see a lot of times where, especially when it comes to podcasts that are based majorly on information, there's some that just, it's all for bands. You read comments, you laugh over it, you give your own opinion. But this one, they want people who have been through things, celebrities, to come share their own side of the story. Most times, for them, it's controversial. Now, we see a lot of podcasters in that field who try to rile up guests. Like, they bring someone on their podcast, and they try to ask or, just make the guest say some things that might either implicate the guest or someone who they had issues with. And then at the end of the day, it now becomes a messy situation. They're fighting back and forth. Blogs who have been waiting to carry for the longest time will now start carrying. And in few days, someone's reputation is completely tarnished. What do you think can be done regarding that? I know that controversy sells, but now people are damning the consequences, especially on the lives and career of other people, just to make sure their content goes viral.
Yeah, I think I love how you've put the question. You've put the question so beautifully. I think that this is my answer begins to sharply deviate from what David said, because putting this responsibility just on creators simply would not work, because there is a base assumption in there that they are on a certain higher pedestal of which there's some expectation. We need to understand that most of the people who are creating now, they have their own personal motivations, and just like people have the right to consume what they want, people also do have the right to produce what they want. So I don't think it's just a matter of putting the impetus on these creators, because just like you said, some of the actions that they do engage in is clearly aligned to them being able to make sure that their content goes viral and they make more money. I think that's the end of it. But you do also expose a certain value chain for misinformation or for let me say, the slander that necessarily happens, because like you said, they pick it from the podcast, they take it to the blogs, they have it on our social media posts, etc. And if we want to deal with it, we need to think of this value chain and how we can disempower it. I think for anyone, for us at The Shaft, we recommend a simple framework. We call it the 3 C's: credibility, context, challenge. I think when it comes to credibility, there are a lot of different stakeholders who have a play here, but the key question here is that who is speaking and what qualifies them. And this is also where we need governmental action, and this is where we need some form of authority to be able to intervene. I think this is the space in which they can do so. So for example, we see people having to caveat finance content podcasters. This is not financial advice. Do not follow this, blah, blah, blah. Health podcasts to say this is not health advice. Do not follow this. And this is because now there are legal implications for the level of information which you're putting out there. So when we begin to separate the content creators to say this one has credibility to speak on this one doesn't, then people would judge it at that value and begin to take them, whether they will take them seriously or not, based on that. But second is context. The question in here is that, is this well researched, or is it's just a personal opinion? And I think creators over here do have a very big role in being able to emphasize that, well, you know what, this is my take. We do that on The Shaft all the time because we pursue a variety of content. And I can't say I'm knowledgeable in every stream of content which we have. Like, you are just a single human being somehow. You're more knowledgeable in psychology, sports, marketing, everything is just not possible. So when you are given a thought, it's very, very important to be able to state, well, this is just my personal opinion, or this is some research, and put it out there. And that's where it allows people to fact check and all of that. But lastly, the last C is challenge. And this is mostly for those who are consuming the content. The question is this already confirming what you already believe? If it is, then there is no value within that podcast for you. It needs to be able to challenge your thinking. Know that you are learning something new from this, affect your life in another way. And in doing that, I recommend building a content diet. Just like any person trying to go to the gym or exercise would do, you need to build a content diet. And it's far better for you to focus on a few podcasts which have higher value and begin to make that influence your life, rather than just following what's the new thing in. And like I said, the fact that it's educative does not mean it will transform your life if you keep on hopping from one podcast to another. You need to be able to curate your diet in a way in which it is able to help you. And I hope this framework helps everyone too.
All right, thank you so much, Erasmus. Okay, I don't know if this can be the last or penultimate question, but Fola, very quickly, now there have been arguments that if only the mainstream media can diversify and adopt some of these measures, like the podcast, like blogging, I don't know why, but they're saying because, again, of the attention span of the people want news given to them, but in a more interesting, more entertaining way. Now, as much as that can be detrimental, do you think it's something that the mainstream media needs to consider, like infusing more podcasts into the news, for example, or doing the news in a podcast style that can service the taste of the audience?
100%. Absolutely, 100%. And I don't even think that it's bad. I don't think it's a bad thing for mainstream media organizations to diversify, to go into podcasting. I mean, take a look at global media organizations that are making podcasts it's also a revenue issue. Because a lot of media organizations that we have in Africa, let me say even in Nigeria, right now, for most of them, the only business model that they have is advertising. So if the agencies are not bringing adverts, they're not making money. But then again, that is not sustainable, that is not reliable. So you need to go to where you can find your audience. You need to be able to break down your content. For example, the New York Times, they have so many digital products outside of the digital New York Times that we read, or even the ones that they used to print. Modern Love is a podcast that used to be a column on the New York Times. It's a podcast, and now it is now an Amazon TV show. So these are how media organizations can reach different audiences, reach diverse audiences, and also make extra money. So I am all for mainstream media going into podcasting, radio stations especially, which I am passionate about. There are so many radio programs that will do fantastically well as podcasts. And like I said, people want your content. You need to take that content to where they are. And if we're talking about the quality and of podcast content, I think it is high time that professional broadcasters, media practitioners start to take over the podcast space, because you have the training, you know the checks and balances, you know what the ethics are. So why not get out there? Look at the podcasts that are doing great all over the world. A lot of them are hosted by professional broadcasters. So why not us? Why can't we get there? So I absolutely, I am all for it 100%.
All right, thank you for that. Now, the final question to David. If you were to advise those consuming most of these content, regardless of what kind of content it is, considering everything that we have discussed, the ethical stance of it, the part of it that we need to learn from, the part of it that is entertaining, what would you say that they should be mindful of going forward?
So I want to answer the question in two ways, but first I want to buttress Fola's point, because I thought what Fola said was really good. And I mean, I'll do a little bit of analysis using this show. So imagine now that Fafuna Africa exists right now on traditional TV, but imagine that you just think of it like a product. And to Fola's point, I think more traditional media companies need to employ product thinking in their approach. So we take this show and you repurpose it as a podcast, and then as a YouTube show, for instance. Maybe News Central takes this segment and segments it as a separate YouTube show. This is something that you see a lot with American media. Yeah. HBO, for instance, has different YouTube channels for all its different shows and all its different programs. And I think more traditional media companies in Nigeria need to do the same thing. Take certain elements of your product, of your programs, think of them as products that can be repurposed for different audiences, right? And that's where podcasting comes in. I mean, imagine if this was also a podcast, a video podcast, an audio podcast, and maybe you build a community event around it. So I think more traditional media companies need to think like that. Then, to the other question about what the audience can do better, I mean, I think people need to, and this is to speak to Erasmus's point, which I thought was good, people need to think deeper about the things that they are consuming. You can't mindlessly consume content and then expect your life to be better, except you're fine with your life being what it is. But if you actually aspire for more, then you have to be more deliberate about the kind of content you consume. And Erasmus is right, the responsibility is not just with the creators, it's also with the audience, right? So you have to be more deliberate about the kind of content that you're consuming. If, for instance, you keep if you keep scrolling through your social media mindlessly, it's going to tell in the kinds of conversations, the quality of conversations that you have. Yeah. And if you have any desire to be better, then you will be more deliberate with the kind of content you create. For instance, there are certain social media platforms that I no longer use because I think that generally the quality of discourse on those platforms does not serve me. And so what I did was I just deactivated my accounts. And I spend more time on platforms that I think will feed me. It's the same thing with podcasts. I listen to a lot of podcasts that dissect things that I'm interested in. For instance, this morning I was listening to a podcast called Song Exploder. And what that does is it takes songs, not all of them are hits, but it takes songs from specific artists, and then it dissects how the song was made, where the artist's mind space was when he or she was creating that, and just the general creative process. And that just takes you into the mind of a creative person. And for me, who is also a creator, it helps me think better. It helps me be more deliberate. So if you're in the audience, this is the beauty of podcasting. There is really nothing that you will be interested in that you will not find in a podcast. So just aim for more, aspire for better, be better, do better, because there is so much more than just viral nonsense out there.
Thank you so much. I don't want us to leave this conversation without hearing from Erasmus. What is your advice to podcasters themselves regarding maintaining ethical standards and at least trying the best to pass out credible information in very few seconds, please?
Yeah. If you want to inform everyone, you need to first of all inform yourself. You need to make sure that you're enriching yourself. We need to start creating platforms which continue to educate creators, bring us all together. I'm always very happy to collaborate with everyone. So it's something that I hope that these things can evolve, come along in order for us to shape ourselves better.
All right, thank you so much. This is the perfect place to draw the curtain. I want to say thank you so much to our guests, the lady and the amazing gentleman who joined in on this conversation. Thank you, Fola Folayan, founder of the Radio Masterclass, who's joining us live from Kigali, Rwanda. And of course, a big thank you to Erasmus Segbefia, who is the co-founder of the Shaft podcast, joining us from Liverpool, United Kingdom. And of course, my in-studio guest, David Adeleke, writer, journalist, and media entrepreneur, joining us live in the studio. Thank you so much. And we're hoping to see a change in the podcast industry. Thank you so much for watching Fafana Africa. Till I come your way next time, have a beautiful day.